Welcome to our JavaScript unit. This will be an introductory lesson where we will look at the basic JavaScript concepts. Well, firstly, what is JavaScript? It's a programming language for the web. It's used for adding interactivity and dynamic behaviour to our web pages, and it's normally used alongside HTML and CSS to create our web pages. JavaScript is one of the three key pillars of web development, so it's really important to understand it. We use HTML to define the content and structure of our web pages. We use CSS to specify layout and styling. And finally, we'll use JavaScript to program the behaviours of our web pages. We can do lots of different things with JavaScript. However, for this lesson, we are going to keep it nice and simple. We'll realise we can change HTML content. We can change HTML attributes and values. We can change HTML styles or CSS, or even hide and show HTML elements using JavaScript. And we'll look at some examples of these. JavaScript can be implemented in a number of different ways. It can be implemented inline, alternatively as an internal script, also as an external script, and we can also access external frameworks. Inline scripting, internal scripting and external scripting is very like CSS, where we can do inline styling, internal style sheets and external style sheets. Scripting works in a very similar way. Welcome to our first example where we will look at changing HTML using JavaScript. Just for clarity, all examples that we're going to provide in this lesson will be inline scripting. So it will be built into a HTML element, in this case a button. Now we're going to change HTML on our page, and the piece of HTML that we will change will be this paragraph element here. It has an ID of demo, and we'll do that using an event which is on click inside this button, which means when we click the button we will execute some code, and that code will be this line that I'm highlighting here at the moment. So let's just talk through that piece of code. On click is our event, and when we click we will access the object which is document, which is our document. We will then use this piece of code here, which is a method. We call that a method, get element by ID, and we feed that method with a parameter which is a string called demo, which is the ID from the paragraph we want to change. Now what this piece of code here does is it takes our HTML element, which is the paragraph. So it looks for the element with the ID demo, which we have here, which is this paragraph, and then it accesses its .inner HTML property. And what it does is it changes that property to this string of text which says hello Grive High School. Now if I run that in Chrome, we launch it, and when I click the button you'll see the paragraph change. A nice example of how to change HTML. In our second example, we will change HTML attributes and values. In this case, we will change the source attribute, the src
attribute of an image. Now we have a HTML element, which is this image tag here, which contains an image with a source bulboff.gif, which is the image name, and we are going to change that when we click a button to bulb on and another button to back to bulb off again. We will use that again with an on-click event inside this button. Okay, we have two buttons on the page, and we'll concentrate on this piece of code here, which is mirrored in the second button. Again, on-click event, again we will get the object document, and we will use the method getElementById. We will feed that with a parameter, which is the ID of the HTML element we want to change. In this case, it's my image, which is the ID of our image HTML element. So we'll take that HTML element and we are going to access the .source attribute and change that to bulb on .gif. So we're going to change the source of that image. That will be mirrored in the second button, with the only difference being the source will be changed back to the bulb off.gif. So we are switching between two images. Let's see how that looks in our browser. So we have our web page with our initial image set as bulb off. When we click our button, we will change that source attribute to bulb on, and then click our second button to change it back to bulb off. In our third example, we'll look at how we change an HTML element's styling. Now we have our HTML element again, which is this paragraph, which has an ID of demo. And we're going to use this button as the object that we will click to change that styling. Inside this button, we have our on-click event, which will access the object document and use the method .getElementById. We'll feed that method a parameter, which is demo, which is the ID of this HTML element. That's how we identify it. And in JavaScript, objects can access other objects, such as the style object. Now, when we access the style object, it also allows us to access the attributes and properties of that. In this case, the font size. Objects being able to access other objects is due to the document object model, which you can look at online. Now we're going to change the font size to 35 px in this case. So let's run this and we can see our HTML element that we want to change here when we click on the button, and we can see that our font size increases. In our final example, we'll look at how we make HTML elements hide and reappear. Again, we'll do this using the style object, only this time we'll use the display attribute to do that. The value of the display attribute can come in three forms: none, inline, and block. We'll explain a little bit about this later on. Again, we have our HTML element that in this case we are going to hide. it is given an ID of demo. Again, we're going to hide that HTML element when we click on the button. The button has an on-click event, which when we click it, will access the object document, and we will get that element by ID using the getElementById method, feeding it the parameter demo, which is the ID of the HTML element we want to access. As mentioned earlier, that object can access the style object and its associated attributes, in this case the display. We're setting this to none, which means the entire element will disappear. When we run this in our browser, the element here will disappear when clicked, as we can see. We'll refresh the page again. Notice that this HTML element moves up. It means that that entire element will be taken out. Now, if we go back and we look at a different example where we can make a HTML element reappear, we'll do that in the same way with the same code, only we are setting this to block. That means our HTML element will be placed in from border to border straight across a line of the page. Again, I'll run this in Chrome and we can see that HTML element here. Okay, and we're going to make another reappear below that. This means that this HTML element will take up the entire line across the page. We won't be able to put any other HTML elements in. If, however, we change it from block to inline and save that and run that page in Chrome, when we click it, we'll see that it floats. This means when it's inline, the HTML element can have HTML items floating to the left or right of that HTML element. Again, we'll just change this back to block and save that there. Thank you for watching this lesson. I hope you found it useful. Please hit like and subscribe for more content.